Okay, so I think that we can slowly moving to Myroslav. If somebody will come exactly 10:30 for your lecture, please go slower. You have 5 minutes to get the point. You want, because you can be here or you can... Przepadamy kabel, tak? That's good. Oh, we have sound. That's good. Ale to będzie to na pewno, Gdzie jest woda, to się każdemu mówi, tu jest woda. Założę for speakers. Nie. Ale myślę, że nawet do pracy możesz już do końca. Yeah, that's a good question about the language. In fact, no, I was Zona. It was very and I was explaining already yesterday on the concept of 3 panels. The first panel is mostly panel arranged and presented by foreigners, by our guests from other countries like Myroslav, Herman, Adam Stanowicz, Todorov. So they are in English. When you look to the program, Zona, very carefully, those lectures are in English. Also the titles are in English. While the Polish papers are in Polish. So that was a simple message to explain what is in English, what is in Polish. But still I'm getting the question. Then okay. I don't know whether this is clear, but that was this great idea that we have the English presentations here. That's why you appeared on the second panel at the beginning. You understand? Okay. And then of course I'm flexible, I changed it because you asked me about it. But in fact the first block was just the English papers. English papers,
I can speak in both languages.
But I have a request. We can talk about this before each presentation. That's easier. But for Myroslav it's clear.
In
Ukrainian, he's running in Ukrainian. He showed this in English, so it's clear, and I will translate the Polish. So the written version is on the English. Okay, so that's the concept, but then of course I found out, which is also the quite interesting concern on my classes. I have big classes this year. I'm surprised really. Like 16 people, probably. Can you imagine? Okay, but then at least one is foreigner. I switch to English, which is logical. Sometimes before I do, I ask, do you speak Polish? Or slower. Okay. Czy rozumiesz, czy mówisz po polsku? And then, in most cases, the answer is no. Then we switch to English. But sometimes when the group is bigger, and I don't want. Please don't treat me bad. And the all foreigners are from China. Then, in many cases, we are creating a separate group, which is also more efficient from the other perspective. Yes.
If you ask me in Polish, if I speak Polish, the most means that I don't answer anything.
If you want to do it in Polish, I move you to the second panel. Is it okay? No, you can. I remember several conferences, even the last physical acousmonium. or maybe 2018, maybe you had me here, we had the translator with the consecutive translation. No, we were also discussing a lot about this. So we found out not really efficient. No, it was like 2 speeches, then all Polish lecture translated to 1 person. Okay, with a headphone, with a big set of headphones, and one was translated. So then I found out to group those lectures. So first English, everybody understands English here, and then we have the General Assembly, we have the rehearsals afterwards, so we will be not present. Yeah, that's why it's also solved by schedule. That's why. But the question by Bożena, the first question is quite clear. I didn't send this message to my friends because I kept the very natural solution. So we didn't need to really discuss what is better. Okay. Is it 10:30?
Sure.
Yes, we are even late. Okay, sorry for this. Myroslav Trofymuk from Lviv. And we will talk about zones, about strefa. Okay, good luck.
Thank you. So, in the beginning was the word, so let me start with the word itself. In Polish strefa, in English zone or area, in Ukrainian Zona, we could say that strefa etymologically is being related to German der Streifen, belt, strip, which is quite logical, but zone or zona is being related to ancient Greek zone, belt or ring. What is remarkable, Old Greek zoi means life, Polish życie, Ukrainian życia. Even from the phonetic perspective, you can notice some similarities. One letter distinguishes those 2 words. We could say there is thin line between those 2 words. In Ukrainian, we use definition tonka межа. Межа, miż, między. Межа means the border between 2 parts of field. In English, there are also synonyms like merge or merging. In Polish, margines, the edge of or border of something. So it can be only me playing with those words, or there are certain interconnections between those terms and notions presented in many languages and cultures. But let's go into semantics of the term zone through the perspective of Ukrainian culture and everyday life. In Ukraine, zone is being related mainly to 2 occurrences. First place goes to prison, and second to the zone as the whole area of 4,000 square meters around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, called also zone of alienation or Chernobyl exclusion zone, or the 30-kilometer zone. Third place goes to the occupation zone, which was related to the Nazi and Soviet occupation of Ukraine and today Russian occupation. Let's check newest Google Trends. I'm using Google Trends analysis to have some idea of what people are usually searching for. Checking it from the perspective of Ukraine during the last years, there are few search requests. The OS zone, which means Joint Forces Operation Zone in East Ukraine. As part of this operation, no-flight zone, war zone, safety zone. And the newest search trend, which is being to get more and more popular, is the nuclear bomb damage zone. But what about Google Trends from the peace life, from earlier times? Checking Google Trends are analyzing everyday communication from the perspective of long-term period, let's say from 2004 till today. Term Zona appeared in conversation and discourse as the part of Schengen zone or comfort zone, especially as the part of idiom getting out of the comfort zone. Summarizing this semantic area around the word Zona, it may be being placed at the intersection between prison, war, or post-nuclear or post-Soviet reality. From the perspective of culture anthropology, prison has at least 2 main displays in post-Soviet Ukrainian culture. One is widely known as the place where criminals are kept as punishment, but another one display was so-called Gulag. We could say that the Gulag system is more or less legacy of the Roman Empire. As we know, there was a very logical process established by Romans. After they conquered a selected region or habitat, they established the so-called castrum. Castrum was a military camp necessary for the control of the colony. But in opposition to Roman camps, Russian Gulag were established with slightly different goal, mainly as a labor camp for dangerous prisoners, but also for those called political prisoners. Artists, opposition, Russian soldiers released from German captivity, farmers whose land was taken by government, Ukrainian intellectuals, opposition, poets and writers. Gulag labor camps are really similar to those well known from Nazi Germany. But the main difference, Gulag were mainly focused on oppression of local people, so to say, starting from Russians and after a few decades focused on Ukrainians. Gulags were used to provide human resources for industrialization need, like building the railway tracks, logging and development of so-called virgin lands. Anyway, during Stalin repression, labor camps, especially Solovki labor camp, was the place for execution of political prisoners. During 30s in Sandarmok forest massive, more than 9,500 people were executed, among them also 1,111 intellectuals of mixed nations. People were buried in mass graves. Official gulags were active for 50 years. So it's legit to say that Gulag culture was some point determinative for the generation of Russian society during those 50 years. Remarkable is that during those years, three generations were changed. We call them the lost, greatest and the silent generation. The silent generation we call kids born from 1928 to 1945. At some point, Gulag was dematerialized and became a spirit of Soviet time. Even the history books are claiming that Gulag did not exist after 60s. But for example, Vasil Stus, Ukrainian dissident and writer, died in Perm 36 prison in 1985, 20 years after Gulag project was shut down. From my perspective of guerrilla social studies, I can say it loud that during 90s in Ukraine, even in western part of it, meaning in Lviv city, for example, and Galicia, was the strong magnetic field of the prison culture intensified by media. Everyday agenda on TV was based on prison, post-Soviet, Hopnik or street gangs media products. Video shows some chanson music, language construct. It was a particular influence zone and dispersion of prison culture among the society. Today we can be sure it was a particularly planned information war and media oppression. From our Ukrainian perspective it looks like that, but the question remains, is the prison culture of vertical hierarchy, strong restrictions, minimum comfort, maximum effort and sacrifice for the state mixed with Stockholm syndrome also a natural habitat for Russian society? Вор в законе is one of the privileged status in Russia. The criminal culture with its own slang, culture and laws, called понятие, became known as Воровской мир, criminal thieves world. I assume Воровской мир is inseparable from the so-called Русский мир or Russian world. Вор в законе will not participate in all political activities, but the situation changed a little after World War II, when many of them were forced to join the army. Coming back to prison, they lost their official status and there was a big war called Beach War between those who stayed in prison and those who fought in the war. War who cooperates with authorities was called Beach. After the breakup of the Soviet Union in 90s, Вор в законе assumed a leading role within the Russian criminal hierarchy. The group was able to infiltrate the top political and economical strata while taking commands of the burgeoning crime network that spread murderously through the post-Soviet countries. War is the highest status on Zona, which means prison in Russian. The lowest status will be opущенный, downcast. One become opущенный through a special ceremony, being collectively raped by other prisoners. One can be raped after being convicted through the public court called bazar or charter. Because of unsubordination, because of collaboration with the prison authorities, but gays, policemen or those convicted of sexual violence could be convicted for rape without any court by prisoners of highest status. Once one becomes opущенный, this status has no statute of limitation. He also cannot be pardoned. Few facts. There is media portal called Prime Crime, which is the official media channel for the criminals world in Russia and abroad. Comfort Zone is the title of one of Russian YouTube shows started in 2020 about some guy being imprisoned in a Norwegian prison and trying to manage the things out there. Those series were and still are high in Google Trends around Ukraine and Russia. Second season of shows is being broadcasting now. After mobilization in Russia, there appeared videos with people claiming not to attend Russian army because they refused to get into the so-called oppushchenny status. During the occupation in Bucha and Mariupol, Izum and other cities in Ukraine, people of all genders, age were raped, killed and buried in mass graves with their hands tied behind their backs. According to the United Nations, the youngest victim of Russians rapists is only 4 years old, the oldest is 82. Post-nuclear reality. Last month I was recording an interview for my radio show Centrum Mundi with Alla Zajakiewicz, Ukrainian composer you all know very well. It was Warszawska Jesień Festival and Alla was presented there her newest piece called Prostory Svitla or White Spaces. The work Prostory Svitla is an attempt to involve artistic, futuristic practices and constructivist principles of the art of Ukrainian futurism in the contemporary artistic context. Among such concepts, the first is the idea of constructive dynamism, described by Valerian Polishchuk in the Avant-Garde magazine 1929, where the author reflects on the problem of artistic perception of dynamic nature of reality. Valerian Polishchuk was a Ukrainian poet and prose writer, literary critic, publicist. Polishchuk was imprisoned on Solovki prison and executed on November 1939 in Sandarmoch. During the next 7 years, relatives of Valerian Polishchuk did not know anything about the execution of Valerian Polishchuk. In 1933, they were issued a certificate of the writer's death, but the document contained false information. Only in 1988, the military tribunal of the Leningrad region informed the artist's relatives that he had been shot by a so-called special card, the NKVD Troika. In fact, this so-called card was provided without a public and fair and trial. The 3 members were judge and jury, very similar to so-called bazaar. No. Polishchuk is the part of so-called executed renaissance. This term was the idea of Jerzy Giedroyc, who was the initiator of the publishing of the anthology of executed renaissance in 1959 in Kultura Paryska. That was a literary political magazine. I was asking Alla about her approach and interest for traditional music, or as she calls it, authentic Ukrainian music. And she told me the story from her study times visiting Chernobyl region with the ethnographical expedition. She recalls it was Novomir village, which is located in Polissa district. She and other students were able to record and listen to old women singing authentic Ukrainian songs around the region. That was year 1985, 2 years before Chernobyl accident happened. Accident, they call it. We Ukrainians, we call it Chernobyl catastrophe. The mute zone, zone of silence. In 2012, during Meridian Chernivtsi festival in Chernivtsi, I recorded the voice of Oksana Zabushko. She was presented her new book, reading an excerpts from her essay Planet Wormwood, Dovzhenko, Tarkovsky, von Trier, and the discourse of the new horror. She remembered standing in the middle of the street in Kyiv, watching snow falling in April. She is describing the sky shining so wonderful and unnatural. After some time, she discovered that it was not snow, but radioactive ash falling on her shoulders from the sky. Since 2006, I was preparing sound material. I knew that it needed to be connected to Stalker movie by Andrei Tarkovsky. The film is loosely based on the book of Strugatsky brothers, Roadside Picnic. This material was waiting till 2012 as I was able to combine it with the Zabushko quote. My project Zona was the essence mixture of ecological, social and historical aspect around Chernobyl zone. But I'm also considering zone as a specific state of mind. Limited, restricted, self-censored, the best way to express it is the following quote by Aleksander Kajdanovsky from the Tarkovsky movie, who is playing Stalker. In the zone, in general, the direct path is not the most safe. The longer the road, the safer it is. The zone is a very complex system, traps, whatever. And all of them are deadly. I don't know what happens here in the absence of a person. But as soon as people appear here, everything is set in motion. Former traps disappear, new ones appear, safe places become impassable, and the path becomes simple and easy. They tangle to the point of impossibility. This is the zone. It may even seem that she is capricious, but at every moment she is what we ourselves have made her to be, our state. I won't hide it. There were cases when people had to return from the halfway point empty-handed. There were those who perished at the very threshold of the chamber. But everything that happened here depends not on the zone, but on us. Zone, strefa. We know that those terms need to describe some part of the land. The zone implies there is something inside. The term zone automatically includes the concept of presence, but also demarcation. The history of the end of 20th century and the beginning of 21st century is an attempt to find a balance between tradition and innovation on the so-called X coordinate, and nature and technology on Y coordinate. And the main dividing force is human self-confidence. Communism is Soviet power plus electrification of the entire country. It was according to this formula that the Chernobyl zone arose, a nuclear power plant as some source of safe and affordable energy for new Soviet zone influence. Consistent and total rewriting of the root code, rewriting history, banning speech, tying hands and tongue, repression and passive aggression, changing of street names, violent coercion. Bend the branch while it is young. Changing the course of rivers, cutting down forests, invading the self-regulating space of nature. Surgical intervention in a healthy body. Documentary involvement from 1982 reveals a series of interviews with engineers and personnel involved in the construction of the dream city, the city of the future, Pripyat. The tone of the video is optimistic and upbeat. All the characters talk about how wonderful the city will be in a few years. The chief doctor of the city talks about the unprecedented increase in the birth rate and points to the newly built maternity hospital with plus 75 beds. The announcer talks about how the entire Soviet Union is jealous of the residents of Pripyat because there is this magic heaven on the earth. The reason for Chernobyl disaster was the experiment at the concealment of the technical imperfection of reactor. Those imperfections were not revealed to the station workers. Silence. The liquidators and firefighters who came to the call at 1 a.m. and April 26 were not informed about the real situation in Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They all died within the next 10 years. Information about the current situation was kept quite quiet until the information began to leak out of European media. After that information, message in the media were as calm and neutral as possible. Zone of silence, the mute zone. Do you remember the Nowy Mir village where Alazayevich went before the Chernobyl disaster? Nowy Mir means new world in English. Until 1927, the village was called Pavlovich. After Chernobyl disaster, all people were resettled without the right of return. Village withdrew from the register in 1999. Ironically, that new world is removed from the register forever. All those women voices that rang out nearby those villages have been silenced forever. Instead of them, stalkers and extreme tourists are listening to the nervous, intermittent cracking of the dosimeter sounds. The zone means danger. Every zone is usually separated by barbed wire so that no one gets inside or gets out. Actually, in the case of the two most common concepts which we talked about above, there are two opposite nature of zone. There are those which cannot be exited and others opposite which cannot be entered. And a thin threshold in between, limit, line, border. They call it reactor active zone inside the RBMK 1000. One of the causes of the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was polarization between the upper and lower part of the reactor core and positive feedback inside. At the moment of the accident, the neutron field has a gap in the middle of the active zone and two maxima on its upper and lower parts. So the one of the biggest catastrophe of 20th century was the consequence of the emptiness and absence. Emptiness in context of nuclear physics and absence of experience, lack of information, created something we know as zone. So the exclusion zone arose from absence, more precisely from the uprooting of traditions and authenticity for the needs of industrialization and electrification. As in the time of Roman, the city of Pripyat is being raised as the site of the construction of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, as the improved version of labor camps, a city simulacrum, a city future without a future, a city propaganda, happy, smiling people, children and construction sites, daily meeting of builders, environmentalists who convinced that there is no danger here, children, construction cranes, tall buildings, officials in suits. In 4 years, all this will turn into a lie that will be hushed up. The victims will not need to shut their mouths because instead of government authorities, it will be done by the so-called peaceful atom. People of Pripyat will be evicted without the right of return. The 30-kilometer zone will be resettled without the right of return. We will be experiencing the consequences of uranium-235 contamination till today and beyond. The lack of knowledge, the lack of experience, and as a result, the absence of the city, the absence of the village, and the interrupted tradition of authentic Police culture, songs, and rituals. Some of them Alex Mikiewicz managed to record before the accident. The exclusion zone is only a very illustrative example of the consequences of the function of the USSR. It is enough to drive through the villages and small towns to notice uninhabited industrial zones with dilapidated factories, collective farm buildings, or unfinished homes. And these are against visible physical projects, unfinished, abandoned. How many such silent projects or ideas, plays, poems, music, left the Soviet and Russian culture behind? Invisible repression implemented by invisible people, just like the invisible atoms are penetrating bodies and minds. The protracted passive aggression of the authorities in relation to Ukrainian culture, freedom and non-conformism is much more frightening. This is a complex activity at different levels. The repressive and visible Gulag system, which seems to case that exist in 1967, but in fact does not disappear anywhere. Vasily Stus, Ukrainian poet, dies in prison called Perm 36 in 1985, 2 years before I and my generation was born. And Polish lawlessness was continuing, particularly in Ukraine, at least to the second Maidan in 2013. Tying of hands, mass murders and group rapes are being the main weapons and communication strategy in US society with this solution in Ukraine on our way to the independence after 90s. Among intellectuals, there was this naive belief in the free will of Ukrainians to become independent. But instead, Ukraine was consequently being bombed by the complex propaganda radiation, the cause of which should have been such diseases as the inferiority complex, identity amnesia, lack of responsibility, and servitude. Permanent hibernation of governmental services, impossibility of self-realization, the survey of heads and state institution and vertical authorities, and indeed of administrative staff of all levels. Every spark of initiative was being extinguished with the words, "There is no money, why all the hurry?" or "Let's make it simple." It's a continuing of the prison culture of subjunction. The slightest manifestation of free thinking or free will, non-conformism or experimentation, criticism, irony, innovative proposals is automatically perceived by the system as a manifestation of weakness, and the person who has shown such weakness or insubordination must be immediately punished by passive group rape. Be silent, be invisible. In Poland you are familiar with that modus operandi, at least from the history of Katyń. Alex Zahajkiewicz remembers in the 60s Stanisław Krutyków got to Artemiev had INS and started making his own synthesizer. Krutikov has come to Moscow and was sent away because he was from Kiev. Krutikov was trying to make synthesizer but never did. Leonid Ivanovich Dys made a synthesizer even presented in Frankfurt am Main or some exhibition. I tried to meet him, said Alla, but after the stroke he could not tell me anything but one word: recursion. There are no description of those tools. The most horrible thing is that Gennady Kohut, author of wonderful book Microtone Music, he is great scientist and brilliant engineer. He created about 100 different electronic instruments, including those that would now be the basis of media art. And there is nothing left, no single instrument. Those are terrible things. That is why the history of electronic music in Ukraine is constantly being born. Ukrainians are calling themselves singing folk, and music is an important part of our life. Now, if we just jump from the early centuries to 19th century, we will discover that classical Ukrainian composers like Mykola Lysenko were using traditional roots in his piano works. Speaking of tradition, ritual songs, we all know the so-called famous Christmas song Carol of the Bell, considering it as international. Originally, this song was written by Mykola Leontovich and rearranged by Petro Virkhonovsky. Speaking of Leontovich, he was killed in his house by Russian Chekists in 1921. This week in Lviv took place the book forum, the annual event which still happened and also was broadcasted online as the part of Hay Festival in Wales. Among other discussions, there were one with the participation of Olena Styashkina, a Ukrainian writer. She said a remarkable thing: many years all nationalities among some Soviet Union were called Russians, like an adjective, Russian Ukrainians, Russian Georgian, Russian Chechen, and so on. And it was done on purpose, as after years the main nationality should have been wiped out, with only the adjective left, the Russian. In 2013, I was finalized my Zona project, which I was preparing since 2006. It is 74 minutes duration, 74 copies self-published CD album, hand-printed vinyl-shaped CD with stamp printed. CD box is being crafted with black textures, paper and hand-printed with white paint and stencil technique. Audio material starts with a moment of silence, 1 minute of silence. Composition which is not included into the track list, staying invisible. A gesture of respect, particularly in mourning for those who have died recently. Silence is important for music as much as cezura is important for poetry. Silence is making other sound appear. We hear sounds because they are distinguishable through the silent parts. After 4:33 by John Cage, we are aware of the meaning of silence. The gap can be considered as a particular zone of emptiness, but still, it is the area which is literally containing nothing. Empty set between Emile Cioran, void which is blocking and disrupting, and Alain Badiou void, as vacuum, which we need to name to make it exist. There is also another type of zone, the unifying force of collaboration, personal communication zone. Not accidentally, Unsound Festival chose title Bubbles for this year's festival edition. People are able to create their own zones, own worlds inside imagination, and as a result, reanimate those imaginary worlds. Make it real. What we are experiencing now in Ukraine, new inteligencija was creating this personal, imaginary, ephemeral bubble, subtle and fragile, but as much invisible that it survived. That's why I am so interested in the grassroots movement, because in Ukraine, grassroots became the official Ukrainian cultural diplomacy movement. Alternative free from bureaucracy, autonomous and highly effective movement. Album Zone is being closed with the epilogue and Oksana Zabushko quote. We, our entire modern civilization, are affected by the melancholic expectation of our end, as an organism by radiation. We are only just at the beginning to inhabit this zone of silence, the mute zone. Thank you. Yes.
The structure of the conference, I don't want to speed it up, even though I was slowing down on the beginning, but I think this is quite important. Also because I'm not sure whether Myroslav will be tomorrow with us. Yes, that's also not quite clear. We plan to make a final discussion tomorrow, 12:30. And that's the question to you. If you will be still in Kharkiv, then it's okay to postpone, because for me this is that's why I choose this already, because of the elements which are extremely essential for the regular art inside different zones, inside the regular safe zones and outside, and the line between, which is moving, which is extending and getting smaller, and it's on move all the time. This is really crazy. But still, the border seems to be a straight line, drawn and still protected. So that's why it's amazing to talk about. Also, with a very personal reference inside. So I mentioned already that when the invasion began, we were lucky to have Myroslav Trofymuk in our studio who made the first speech, which there were some elements common, but now it's as I see, it's a really different perspective because after 9 months. And I don't want to say that for all of us because when we are getting the Myroslav here, he's just telling us this. That's also much more complex now. I try to omit certain words like deep, like because it is like this. But